Jaya Prabhuji. Hello, welcome to the Retroprogressive Yoga Institute. My name is Swami Omkarananda. I am a disciple of Prabhuji since 1997, and in these courses I am sharing my reflection of the book written by him called Tantra, Liberation in the World. In this book, Prabhuji shares the wisdom of the tantric path, how the vision of this path enriches own search, and the message, the retroprogressive yoga. So it's fascinating, it's complex. So the purpose of these classes is just to select central paragraphs in the book, analyze them further, engage our own questioning upon to see how I understand it and how can I apply to my life. And my hope is that it will enrich you, also facilitate the reading of the book. It's in no way these courses are intending to replace the book, because we just share a few points of every chapter. There is so much more to understand. But I try to explain further terminology that Prabhuji takes for granted that the reader already is familiar with. So if you are beginning your path in this in the study of this wisdom, so these courses, I hope it will be beneficial. In the first course, we studied the section of the book called the Tantric Vision, and there we understood the way of approaching spiritual search according to this revelation. This course is to understand better the origin and development of the Tantric revelation. And for that, we need to learn more things that, as I said, the Tantric revelation is complex. It develops in many different directions, many different attitudes. So I will try to simplify, and I will try to build up the knowledge by giving in every class a bit of perspective until hopefully at the end of the book and at the end of these courses, we will have a very deep understanding of all these phenomena. So far, we have been referring to Tantra as a general phenomenon, as a whole revelation. But within the Tantra, there were two distinctive approaches: the approach of the left hand and the approach of the right hand. And from this class on, we're going to study the difference between them, and we're going to refer to each one in a different term. The left hand Tantra is the Kaula path. And to understand Kaula, we need to understand the context, the origins, and how it emerges. So let's see what is the origin of this revelation. Prabhuji writes, there is controversy among scholars about the origin of the Tantric tradition, since some of its occult practices oppose the Vedas. Based on this, most scholars think that the religion of the Tantras differs from that of the Vedas and therefore is not Vedic. The truth is that the practices taught by the Tantras can be divided into Astika or Vedic and Nastika or non-Vedic. The two traditions do not in fact differ in philosophy, only in practice. That is to say, the differences between them are more about the attitude and practice than the philosophical essence of their teachings. Tantra developed in many different directions, with different traditions, lineages, approaches. Now we can identify the common denominator among all of them in the attitude, in the philosophy, and that's why Prabhuji clarifies that we're talking here about one tradition, but we do find significant differences in the path, in the practice, in how to reach that goal that this revelation invites us to. So in order to understand all the complex development of this revelation, we need to delve deeper into the origins. We studied last class about the Vedic revelation and how this Tantric revelation appears within it. So we are now in the Vedic times. There are different hymns and different rituals being performed, and different gods in the pantheon that are being worshipped. Now, there is one particular god that goes and gains more popularity among the worshippers, and this is the god Rudra. So there was the Vedic cult of Rudra. This is how Prabhuji writes. Between 200 and 400 of the current era, the worship of the Vedic god Rudra gained popularity. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad, which was put in writing sometime between the 400 and the 200 before the current era, was the first text that synthesized the Shiva philosophy. It revealed that the Vedic god Rudra was the transcendent supreme being and the creator, preserver, and destroyer of the cosmic manifestation. The god Shiva was identified as Rudra and raised in the Vedic pantheon to the Supreme Self. We see here the born of the Shiva tradition. You know, India was a very extensive land with many different spiritual developments. At the whole, as the maximum authority were the Vedas, but then developed all kind of additional traditions and revelation with deep respect to the realized teachers that reveal and transmit their own sutras and their own practices to his disciples. So the Shiva tradition was one which went and gained popularity, meaning establishing temples, establishing places of worship, creating different lineages and different groups that identify themselves as Shiva. The Upanishads are part of the Vedic literature, and we see that the Shvetashvatara Upanishad recognize in this worship of Rudra the Supreme Being. The Supreme Being is, we see here, the development of the passage between the worship of different forces of nature to the worship of a supreme and one being. So we see the development of this Vedic revelation from becoming more dualistic to a more monistic type of approach to reality. And it identifies Shiva as the supreme consciousness, as the supreme being, which is not that like in the Vedic approach you have the creator, the destroyer, the preserver, but there is one supreme being that is above all, that he is the creator, the destroyer, the preserver of all the cosmic manifestation. And this Rudra was identified with the god Shiva. And this is how the Shiva tradition was born. From within the Vedic cult of Rudra, we see the born of the Puranic cult of Shiva. Prabhuji writes, the earliest evidence of the Shiva tradition is from the 2nd century before the current era. By the 5th century of the current era, Shaivism had clearly emerged as a dominant tradition in India and even Southeast Asia, after which a great variety of traditions developed. The religion of the Puranic Shaivism developed during the reign of the Gupta dynasty. The Puranas were written down between the 6th and the 11th centuries of the current era. Many Brahmanas increased the popularity of this tradition by orally spreading Puranic stories about Shiva throughout India. The origins of the Tantric revelation is not easy to reconstruct because there are very few evidence of its beginnings. So there were many discussions and controversy among scholars to try to track really its origins. By now, with the evidence found, I think there is a quite consensus that the Shiva tradition was the origin of Tantrism. Now, what was the Shiva tradition? We said it was originally a Vedic god, the worship of Rudra. Afterwards, Rudra was elevated within the pantheon of the Vedic gods to the supreme god in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. And then that Upanishad creates all the foundations for the Shiva tradition, Shiva philosophy. And then the god Rudra was identified with Shiva, Shiva being the supreme and Rudra being one of Shiva's manifestations. And then the tradition of the Puranic Shaivism. Puranas are, we study the difference between Smriti and Shruti. So the Purana is part of the Smritis, that they were taking different traditions approach. We have Shaiva Puranas, we have Vishnu Puranas, and this is how we see under the same umbrella of Vedic society, we see the traditions going and focusing their worship in different aspects of gods. So this is the Shaiva tradition, and went and became very popular. And it was a right hand, we are going to study the right hand, following all the principles of the Vedas, and being taught by Brahmanas in the way of stories. The Puranas are beautiful later development of the revelation, in which the stories, the mythology between gods is explained in a way that it's really relatable, even for the illiterate. So that's how the Brahmins went throughout India popularizing the Puranas, telling the stories, and how the followers of this tradition could relate to this, and from there come all the mantras, the art, the expressions, and it went and became a very popular tradition, creating many temples. Now you need to understand that the temple, in the time of that we're talking about, it was not just another aspect of society. It was a very central aspect of society. When it was a city or a town that they have a Shaiva temple, it was the center of their life. There is where everybody met. This was, everybody supported the temple, donated to the temple. The temple gave the cultural education to the people, the artistic education, the performances, the pujas, the festivals, the employment even. To maintain a temple, they have a lot of architectures and dancers and gardeners. So the kings were supporting the temple. They were patronizing the temples and giving support, because it was really the central life of the Vedic society. So whenever there was a Shaiva temple, there were Shaivas around which their life turned around the yearly festivals, the prayers, the request from the gods for protection. So it was really the centrality. There was a very spiritual society. And in the Vedas, there were the principles of how to organize the society. So the Shaivism became more and more prominent in different parts of India. So what happened? How the Tantra arose from within Shaivism? Let's recap. We have the Vedic cult of Rudra. From within the Vedic cult of Rudra emerged the Puranic cult of Shiva, which was a devotional right-hand type of tradition. And from within this cult emerged the first pre-tantric cults. Prabhuji writes, between the 2nd and the 5th centuries of the current era, an ascetic devotional tradition developed that was later called the Ati Marga, or the supreme or direct path. Lay followers of Shiva who aspired for final liberation, or moksha, requested initiation and adhered to an ascetic life of extreme penance. The later tantric sects adopted these practices, and therefore the Shaiva Ati Marga is thought to be the origin of the tantric tradition. Among the followers of Shiva, we see the emergence of certain seekers that they wanted to take their path a step forward, and they start worshipping Bhairava. Bhairava is Shiva, but in its fierce and terrifying aspect. Here we see the seeds of the left path, in which instead of living in the temple And within society, these seekers chose an ascetic life of extreme penance. They are still considered pre-tantric. We don't see yet the emergence of Tantra, which has a very specific characteristic, but they put the seeds, because many of these qualities that we find in these cults, they were later developed into the Tantric era. And what they choose, they call the Atimarga. We have many different cults within these ascetics, and we will learn the different characteristics in later courses. But the general qualities is that they choose to leave society, to live ascetics, to go to the crematoriums, and to experiment with really forbidden substances. They start crossing the lines of the Vedic principles and looking for moksha, identifying that to live a religious life, it's not enough for them. It's if we want moksha, if we want liberation, we need to go beyond even our religious principles and to go for reality, not for religion. And their fascinating step, and we will dedicate chapters to explain their view. So now, for now that we are trying to drill into the development and origins of the tradition, just keep this in mind. We have the Puranic, and within the Puranic, we have the pre-tantric sects of the Atimarga. Within the pre-tantric cults of the Atimarga, we see also a further development. There are some cults that choose to stick to the principles of purity of the Vedas and to worship benevolent aspects of Shiva as Sadashiva. As the ascetics took and moved the limits farther away and farther away in order to reach complete moksha, liberation, we see that they went and took the practices a step forward towards the left-hand practices and worshipping more fierce aspects and experimenting with forbidden substances for the Vedic tradition. The Shiva tradition was developing in the mainstream. It was a very public development, but there was a very ancient and secret parallel tradition that is believed to be even pre-Vedic, and it was not registered, so we don't have a lot of history. It was not a written tradition, but it's believed to be originated even 2500 before the current era. They were the shamanic cults of the goddess. And the goddess worship the feminine aspect of the divine and the unity of the female with Shiva. They were nature-oriented cults. They worship the circles of life. They involve animal sacrifices in their practices. They used to offer blood. They were Himalayan cults that worship in the mountains, in the forest, in the nights, in the cremation grounds. They had very sensual qualities, the goddesses. They were like the god of fertility. They worship life and life-giving. They worship the menstrual circles and the phases of the moon. And they worship the goddesses. There were 8 main goddesses, matrikas, that they used to offer their rituals, and the goddesses were accompanied by the yoginis. The yoginis were female spirits that they can bestow spiritual knowledge to the practitioners. So imagine a night in an Indian forest, in the secret Shaktipita location where there is a descent of power, and there the women of the village, the powerful feminine women of the village, gather to worship the goddess. So they were a feminine-oriented cults that they invoke the goddess, they invoke the spirit, and it's believed that the spirit wished to possess a woman, and the woman was able and capable to transmit the gnosis, the spiritual realization, the alternate states of consciousness to whoever offer worship. Now the men that wanted to benefit and to get the blessings of the goddess used to ask to be accepted as an adept, as a devotee of one of the goddesses. Now, it was a woman directed worship, practiced within women circles. But if there was a man that they wanted to be initiated in these cults, he needed to be very brave. They were called the heroes, the hero path, the path of the brave, the viras. Because what they need to do is to please the goddess. How he pleased the goddess, he needs to totally surrender to her, to go crazy for her, to be able to offer himself. That's why the symbolism of these cults is the head of the devotee. He's crazy for her, like Shiva is crazy for Shakti. And this attraction make him a slave of her. And he goes and begs for knowledge, for wisdom, for a spiritual experience. The man that was brave enough to go and ask for initiation from these goddesses, he used to go to these rituals and intercourse sexually with one of the goddesses through a woman. The woman used to be possessed by one of the yoginis and offer through sexual intercourse the realization to the devotee. This devotee needed to be very male, very brave, able to control his sexual urges, to hold his ecstasies, and to please the goddess. Often offering his own blood to the goddess, his own sexual fluids. And in this intercourse, he was transported to the world of the yoginis, becoming one of the Kaula. And here we see for the first time the Kaula term. Those are left-hand practices that they break. Or there was, like, even before moral Vedic norms, they didn't adhere to these norms of purity and sexual restraint. They were like completely connected to life, to nature, to the dark aspects, and they found beauty in death, beauty in temporality, because it's the beauty of life. So these very fierce shamanic practices, it's believed to have been influencing the Atimarga, the practices of the Atimarga. So the Atimarga Kapalikas, that we will learn later on the meaning of this cult, took the influence from the Shaiva tradition and from the Shakti tradition, creating the ground to give birth to Tantra. So this is how we see the birth of the right hand and the left hand path. From the mild pre-tantric cults that worship according to the Vedic principles, we see the birth of the right hand Tantra path. And from the Atimarga cults that they cross the lines of the Vedic principles and they experiment with more forbidden substances and worship the fierce aspect of Bhairava and the influences that it got from the shamanic cults of the goddess, we see the birth of the left-hand Kaula path. Origins of Tantra. Prabhuji writes, during the Gupta dynasty, 320 to 500 of the current era, Puranic literature became popular throughout the Indian subcontinent. Based on these texts, various forms of Brahmanical worship developed, called Smarta or Pauranika. By the time the Gupta dynasty declined, Smarta worship had been well established. At this point, India saw significant growth in esoteric cults. Some elements of these cults were absorbed by Brahmanical worship. However, most followers of the orthodoxy rejected the new system, considered them to be a threat to the Vedic purity. As a result, Shiva followers were divided into two groups, the initiated and the uninitiated. Gupta Empire. It was one empire that ruled the whole of India during 200 and something years. It was a time of development, a time in which the Puranic tradition developed and spread throughout India. There was a time of architecture and science and peace. But when this empire fell, similarly to the fall of the Roman Empire, there was chaos in India. There was such a chaos that the land divided in different kingdoms, and these smaller kingdoms quarreled between them. So there was instability in every sense possible, in the tradition, in the religion aspect, in the economical aspect, in the safety. It was dangerous times, disturbing times, turbulent times in India. In this background, in which the esoteric cults appear, there were more and more Shiva followers that they wanted to take shelter in a tradition that gives power to the individual. What Tantra comes to give. Tantra says, leave the mainstream practices, the collective practices, and focus in your development. Within you, it's everything. You don't depend on the brahmanas to perform for you the rituals. You can do your own ritual. You don't depend on money to offer to the goddess. You can, within you, find the realization because you are divine. You don't need to depend on anything else. Now, what this path gave, it gives power. It returned the power and the independence to the individual. People were thirsty for this type of development. They used their own body to unleash their own powers, totally independent from the external world. And moreover, they give the wisdom to deal with any circumstances. When you have wisdom, when you master the wisdom of surrender and resilience, you know that whatever comes, I will overcome. So it took the fear of the uncertainty into an inner peace. They chose to teach the peace within, that it doesn't depend, that everything can crumble around, but nobody can take the peace from within if you master your powers, if you're introspective. You are independent, you are a hero, you are the only responsible for your own liberation. So this is the fresh message that Tantra brought in very turbulent times. And then we see that there were those who chose to stick to the Vedic tradition, but many chose to join these sects of the Tantra and to get initiation, to get empowered. The initiation was believed to give liberation just by the fact of the initiation. That's why it was so important to be accepted into a tantric cult and to be initiated, because then liberation was assured, because it was so powerful, so karmatically cleaning this initiation, that they were like experiencing divinity just in the first step of their path, and then knowing exactly what to look for. So we see Tantra emerge, like spread all over, because of its attitude also. It brought a totally different social order. It deleted this caste system that it was so Vedic, and it gave the opportunity to everyone to experience divinity. new kings were interested in this type of development. They were looking for a different way to organize their kingdoms, how to engage, how to reorganize the society under a different realm. And they were interested in also powering themselves to get the power. And this was also something new that brought Tantra, that was allowed kings, rajas, to be initiated. Rajas were kshatriyas, but in Tantra they found their path, the spiritual path, and they wanted to be very much empowered to be able to lead their kingdom to safety and to peace. And they were patronating and supporting this development, these new ashrams and these new types of worship. So Tantra went and became the mainstream, and they went and gained a lot of popularity. And this is how we see within the Shaivism those who keep following the Puranic tradition and keep going through this path, but we see more and more how the Tantric tradition developed. As the Tantric tradition developed, we see a further bifurcation between the Dakshinachara, the right path, and the Vamachara, the left path, also called the Vama Marga. It's known in the tradition of India that the right hand is the hand of purity, which we engage in all the pure activities related to our body. And the left hand is the hand that we keep for the impure occupation with our body. Usually when you're seeing puja, we only do puja with the right hand and keep the left hand behind the back. It's the impure hand. So this is a symbolic way to call this, because the left hand Tantra deal with all the impurities of the body. They saw in the everything that is that is disgusting, they found beauty, because it's the beauty of unity. I challenge you to do a small exercise and see the difficulty of this path. Think about something that is totally disgusting for you, just unbearable disgusting. What if you go and voluntarily do it? I don't think about immoral things, just disgusting things. That in my perspective, all my conception is just this guy. Okay, in the moment that I go forward with awareness, voluntarily, to do something that I'm totally repulsed of, is a step towards freedom. Because now I have a choice. Now I'm not a slave of these rejections. The rejections are my mental condition, and I want freedom. So these are the challenge that took these heroes that follow the left path. And this, we see how these two traditions went and developed in parallel, giving option for two types of seekers. So let's learn a bit the differences between them. What are the differences between these two approaches? On the right path, the devotees of Shiva that chose to get initiated, so used to approach a master, a lineage, and ask for initiation. The novelty that this path of Tantra brought is that it was also accepting married people. In the past, it was kept for ascetics. This pre-tantric world need to be ascetic and live out of society. But the Tantra domesticated these antique practices of the Atimarga and brought spirituality to the people, to the married people. And then they could handle their regular life within society, but in their intimacy follow their spiritual path. The left path was open to married people and to ascetics, but there were many that there were ascetics in this path. And what the left path offers is that instead of asceticism as a condition, it offers different alternative types of rituals that doesn't necessarily demand asceticism. On the right path, the teachings were received from the Guru in a setup of a satsang. A satsang, it was a gathering at the house of the Guru. In the left path, the meetings of the Kaula, of the group of seekers that follow the Guru, were usually called melapas. Melapas were gatherings that have a sensual or even orgiastic quality if the seekers were qualified for that levels of ritual. On the right path, the gatherings with the Guru usually involved a puja, which is a worship of a deity, or a yantra. There were the discourse, the sermon of the Guru, in which he imparted the teachings of certain tantra or agama, and there was a communal meal, prasadam. There was an emphasis of the communal type of worship and the communal aspect of the spiritual development. The left path was quite an individualist path. These meetings were meant to dissolve the cultural and psychological boundaries, to overcome conditioning and trigger spontaneous enlightenment. So they involve really powerful energies, dangerous energies. They evoke goddesses, yoginic spirits, and the older worship was to please them with really total surrender, to go into the extreme. What we surrender our comfort zone, our ego. And to delete the ego, they brought to bring these alternate states of consciousness that will allow us to taste something from the beyond. So they took really all the extreme practices that allow them to get liberated. On the right path, they put emphasis on the worship of Shiva. On the left path, the emphasis was on the worship of the female aspect and the fierce deities. On the right path, it was believed that liberation comes through powerful initiation and after ritual practices. So the belief on the right path was that in the initiation, liberation is granted. To maintain this liberation, we need to continue the ritual practices. Ritual was central practice in the right path, on the right path. Now, this ritual practice will bestow liberation at the time of leaving the body. It was believed that liberation is a promise, is secure if we follow the rituals throughout our lives. On the left path, liberation was given through powerful spiritual experiences and yogic practices. On the right path, liberation was at death. It was warranted after initiation. But on the left path, liberation was in life. All the practices were aiming to give the transcendental experience. And no wonder that so many experience enlightenment on this path, because even to start a path like this, we need really to mean it. I don't want a successful social life. I don't want anything else. I don't care about my upbringing and how I look in front of society. I want God and only God. And for that, I'm ready to give everything, because I think that there is nothing else that's worthwhile in this life than getting liberated. It's all the purpose of life. What is the point of anything else? So they did achieve liberation in life, and this is how Prabhuji called his book, Tantra Liberation in the World. On the right path, they accept the social norms imposed by Brahmanism. They didn't want to challenge them, they didn't want to revolt against them. They wanted to live their spiritual life in harmony with everything that was socially accepted. Not on the left path. They challenged the traditional social order. They saw that religiosity can be another type of slavery, and they were not ready to follow their rules. They were more loyal to their intuition, their understanding, their direct experience than what is imposed by others, by previous authorities, or by the scriptures. Those are just some of the differences, and we will continue exploring these two different paths in more details in future classes. But I want to finalize by grasping the spirit of the difference between them. And for that, I will offer you this analogy. Imagine a ski resort. There are ski practitioners that need to be brought to the top of the mountain so they can ski down. Now, there is a funicular that safely brings them up, and from this location, the very elevated location, they can have a marvelous view. That can be compared to the right path. Yes, it's a path that brings you up. Yes, it's very elevating. Together with that, it's very safe. Of course, you need to be brave to go into this funicular and enjoy the heights of the spirit. But this is something that it's not being done alone. It's being done in a group and protected in a way, guided. The left hand are those who go down from this funicular and they see a higher peak. And they say, you know what, I will keep going alone, by myself. The right path is amazing. They brought them very high, but for them, it's not enough. In the right path, the practitioner look for complying with the norm of the whole, to stay in tune with their position among the general public, and this is by itself a spiritual efforts. It's a demand, give up my own desires for the good of the whole. The rituals are being done for the good of the whole society, for the harmony of the society at the whole. The left path is a totally individual path. Is this person that once he's very high in the mountain, he wants to go on. Yeah, but there is higher. There is higher. Why to look at the higher? You see how high you are. Yes, I'm high, but I'm not satisfied with this height. I want to go on. Now, the path of the left is dangerous because he leaves behind all the rules. There is no rules anymore. There is not a path that somebody make for me so I will walk through. There is no path. I can go to whatever direction I want, and it's an unexplored territories. Nobody went there before me that can tell me to be careful. There might be an avalanche here, or you can slip. No, I'm making the path by myself. It's a totally different life, the life of the left hand. It's a life outside of society, even criticized by society. Those are those that they don't really care to have a position in society. It's like their critics are irrelevant for me, because what is society? We're speaking about eternity. We're speaking about my eternal life. What is this small town and these small dealings that usually keep us so busy, right? I need to empower myself. I don't depend on the rituals made by the brahmanas for my benefit. I will do my own ritual. I will be my own priest. I repeat my mantra for my own benefit, because I deeply believe that in the personal is where the revelation can happen. And the liberation, my best way to contribute to society is to liberate myself. I cannot change others. It's not in my hand. But it's in my hand to know if there is such a thing as others. What is others? Where is the limit between me and the others? And what eventually and ultimately the revelation shows is that all is one. So there is no further compassion of the one who knows that we are all one. I cannot harm myself. If I harm others, I harm myself. So the path of the left is the path that it necessarily requires guidance. You cannot walk alone. No way. You will not get to the peak. It needs a very close guidance of a spiritual master that they went there before, and it's ready to guide you. It's a path of creativity where you unleash your creative powers, your Shakti, your magical powers. It's said that those Kaulas were empowered with the magical powers, with the supernatural power. They work with magic, with alchemy, with forbidden substances, with pleasure, with ecstasies. That was the path of the Tantra, and with extreme penance also. But it's the freedom that if I can take voluntarily upon myself certain penance, I am free. Because then when the inevitable suffer will come, I am ready, I am surrender. I live with the death in front of my eyes. I know that this life is not eternal. And I don't deny by dealing with the domestical aspects of life. No, I know that the time is short. I know that the goal of life is liberation, and I'm ready to pay the price that it takes for me to get liberated, because ultimately we all want bliss, and bliss cannot be found in the temporal aspect. Bliss is when we touch our real nature. So we will stop here, and in the following classes we will keep understanding this amazing revelation and seeing how we can take something from this spirit to our lives. We will meet in the next class. Thank you. Jaya Prabhuji.